I think that's an important point. And I was thinking about, there's another Lincoln, I'm writing a book on Theodore Roosevelt right now. And, you know, first off, remember there's also the Lincoln here's the Lincoln of hope. That we have North fighting South, and here's Lincoln building the Transcontinental Railroad, creating East to West. And here's Lincoln thinking about the economy of the future after they win the big battle. The Transcontinental Railroad happens. You have, by the time Theodore Roosevelt's president 100 years ago, he said, I'm all about Lincoln, TR. He said, because Lincoln taught me that the federal government can intervene to do what's right for the economy. It could bust up trust. It could bust up monopoly. It has that power. And in that way, Lincoln is an enabler of presidents to get in there and do big things, that the federal government doesn't have to be hostage to a corporate climate or to a foreign power, that it can go in and do its own thing. And Roosevelt went so far as when Congress and the Senate said no to the Arizona Territory saving the Grand Canyon, they were going to mine it for asbestos, zinc, and copper. TR said, I'm going to use the executive power of Lincoln for an executive order to stop that he created using an Antiquities Act and an obscure kind of thing to save the Grand Canyon from being mined. Something as far removed as the government saving a natural heirloom still has roots back to Lincoln. I don't think you can be in serious person as president if you're not constantly turning back to the precedents that Lincoln had established.
So part of the way to make a stronger country is actually to strengthen the presidency, and by it be able to put the government in a position where it can do a number of things. This is a good time, I think, to bring in another clip, because in a certain sense, these questions of the difference that the exercise of government can make in an era, these are obviously very, very important topics in relation to the area of Detroit today. So maybe we could cue up Cedrina Smith's answer to questions that were given to her in the person on the street questions.
I actually think it was a great thing, and that today it still looms on. Everyone still has that feeling about, even though it was so many years ago, how it changed so many lives, especially African Americans. It kind of brought us into a new boundary, a new frontier, a new life, basically.
Something that was very important to Lincoln, as several of you have said, was the importance of respecting the dignity of work. That the ways in which people worked, had a sense of craft in relation to their lives, was in some ways the bedrock of freedom, liberty, rights, participation, and democracy. And these are very, very difficult times in relation to the capacity to assure Americans that they are in a position to enjoy that bedrock. What do you think would be the ways that a Lincoln would respond to the crises that we're talking about today? And given that the link has been brought up a number of times in our conversation, how do we think about the actions of President Obama in light of that legacy of a strong presidency, a strong government, fighting on behalf of unifying and strengthening our country?
Could I just interject that I believe work is an absolute right that we as human beings possess, the right to work and the right to benefit from the fruits of our labor. And I think that the government has a responsibility to assist the economy in any way possible, to make opportunities available for people to secure employment, to negotiate for fair wages for the work that they do. And if that makes me a Detroit radical, then so be it.
Well, let me build off of that a little bit, because let's connect some of the dots. Let's connect some of the dots that we've had here. The sense that there's a line that runs, as Ambassador Young was saying, from Lincoln's presidency to the New Deal of Franklin Roosevelt to the Great Society of Lyndon Johnson. If we're talking about those kinds of connections, should we think, for instance, about stimulus spending the reignition of public works in the United States is something that's part of Lincoln's legacy?
It's one of Lincoln's greatest legacies. Lincoln created essentially the modern America that we know of, not only with the Transcontinental Railroad, with the Homestead Act, with the land-grant colleges. I mean, he transformed...
Slow down and say that again.
Not only Lincoln created modern America as we know it, in terms of allowing the federal government to have the power and authority to modernize and reshape and redefine the nation. He did it through a number of acts, not only the Transcontinental Railroad, which Doug pointed out, but the Homestead Act, in which he offered public land to millions of people who were landless and poor, through the land-grant colleges, from Michigan State to Iowa State, all of the great land-grant colleges are from Lincoln's hand signing this bill. And Lincoln understood, as a number of you have pointed out, the close link between denying people the right to receive the fruits of their labor, especially slavery, with poverty, that the two are intricately interconnected. And he also linked it with a concentration of wealth. Lincoln understood in his own day that a few 100,000 of the wealthiest people in the country were Southern slave owners, who essentially dominated the nation. He and other Republicans referred to it as the slave power. He was accurate in that assessment. Without question, the wealthiest Americans were Southern slave owners who owned thousands of slaves. He hoped to redistribute the wealth, in a sense.
But that was what we understood in the Civil Rights Movement, that when we moved on the Voting Rights Act, it was because 5 or 6 Southern senators held the whole Congress hostage by seniority. And they brought all the military bases down. They could filibuster. And the registration of black voters was to integrate the economy, not just for black people, but it was to liberate the North from enslavement by the South to a military-industrial complex. But when Martin was killed, he was raising another question. Being in a democracy without the right to vote, you know you're a slave. But we've got people in capitalism without access to capital.
That's right.
And that also makes you a slave. And so some of us have been saying under a financial literacy movement that when you empower the banks, why not require the banks to give every American citizen a debit card so that you have a photo ID that can get your checks cashed. You can have direct deposits from any of your benefits into a bank account. You would immediately give poor people 20 to 30% increase in income simply by cutting out all the middlemen that cash these checks. But if Obama, it's all right for him to give billions of dollars to the bankers and for them to take luxury vacations with their corporate jets. But they would require communism. I mean, he is not in a position quite yet, but that is clearly the requirement, that the power that we're using to stimulate the economy at the top has to find its way to the bottom. And the best way to stimulate the economy is from the bottom up. Hubert Humphrey used to call it not trickle-down economics, but percolator economics.